Only days ago, Nick Sortor was assaulted in Portland by a flag-burning mob, and we've made it 1 year penalty for inciting riots. We took the freedom of speech away because that's been through the courts, and the court said you have freedom of speech. But what has happened is when they burn a flag, it agitates and irritates crowds. They've never seen anything like it on both sides, and you end up with riots. So we're going on that basis. We're looking at it not from the freedom of speech, which I always felt strongly about, but never passed the courts.
Well, Trump did a recent press conference where he addressed attacks on freedom of speech, which according to him are coming from him. He is the one who is attacking freedom of speech. He said, in case you missed it, we took the freedom of speech away, just like that, just took it away. So Grok actually confirms beneath that video on X that burning a flag is protected speech in this country, saying flag burning in the US is a constitutionally protected First Amendment right over which the president has no authority. The issue has been litigated numerous times throughout history, culminating in the landmark Supreme Court case, Texas v. Johnson in 1989. So I've got more from this press conference, but first, Cenk, yeah, you're right. He ran on protecting freedom of speech. Half of the podcast bros, especially on the right, who were voting for him, they were the ones who were like, yeah, we want our freedom of speech and he's gonna protect it, even though their freedom of speech was never actually being threatened at the time. They didn't really understand that. Now, here we are, Trump just took it away.
Yeah, so we're gonna get into details of how the Supreme Court has ruled on this and why Trump is wrong on the facts and the law. But most importantly, you all saw him run on freedom of speech, right? I mean, he said it, what, hundreds of times, thousands of times? We gotta protect freedom of speech, and yeah, we hate cancel culture. And you just saw it with your own eyes. Quote, we took the freedom of speech away. So one of the questions I have, just listen to the whole story, and find out, by the way, which conservative justice, legendary conservative justices, agreed that this was a freedom of speech issue. And then at the end, if you're on the right or you voted for Trump, tell me how this isn't hypocrisy. Because I don't see how it couldn't be hypocrisy in any other way. I mean, it has to be. So I'm curious whether folks will acknowledge it. But anyway, let's give you the facts of the story and we'll come back and analyze.
Yeah, there's a lot to this story. So in this meeting, Trump, accompanied by his Secretary of Homeland Security, Noem, addressed the rampant terrorism that is happening all across this country, perpetuated, of course, by the radical left, and more specifically by Antifa. But the question is, who is Antifa? No one knows. The term Antifa refers to a decentralized movement or ideology representing anyone that is against fascism of any kind. The use of the term goes all the way back nearly 100 years to Nazi Germany, and it has been used many times since then across Europe and Asia whenever authoritative fascist regimes try to assert dominance over the populace. So still, Noem claims that her ICE agents recently picked up the girlfriend of one of the founders of Antifa. Take a look.
They have been so bold in making sure we're bringing those individuals to justice. One of the individuals we arrested recently in Portland was the girlfriend of one of the founders of Antifa, and that we are hoping that as we go after her, interview her, and prosecute her, we will get more and more information about the network and how we can root them out and eliminate them from the existence of American society.
But this administration, as we were talking about in the previous story, they love to deal in these vague, broad terms. And that is understandable because the more specific terms, they tend to confuse them. So here is a clip of Trump from that same press conference asking who in response to a question about habeus corpus.
Have you given any more thought to possibly suspending habeus corpus to not only deal with these insurrectionists across the nation, but also to continue rapidly deporting illegal aliens?
Yeah, is suspending who?
Habeas corpus. So.
Oh. I don't know. I'd rather leave that to Christie. What do you think?
No, sir, I haven't been a part of any discussions on that.
And it's particularly funny that he asked Noem about habeas corpus because until recently, she also did not know what it meant.
So Secretary Noem, what is habeas corpus?
Well, habeus corpus is a constitutional right that the president has to be able to remove people from this country and suspend their right to.
Let me stop you, ma'am.
Suspend their
Habeus
right to.
corpus, excuse me, that's incorrect.
So a lot of this comes down to rhetoric and diction, and that's no accident. It's no accident that Trump and his administration insist that protesters are part of a shadowy, radical leftist underground group called ANTIFA. It's no accident that they refer to any kind of dissent these days as terrorism. So this is from NBC News. It says, asked about discussions regarding invoking the Insurrection Act, White House spokesperson Abigail Jackson said in a statement, the Trump administration is committed to restoring law and order in American cities that are plagued by violence due to Democrat mismanagement. And President Trump will not stand by while violent rioters attack federal law enforcement officers. The administration will work to protect federal assets and officers while making American cities safe. The act gives the president broad discretion regarding its invocation. It can be invoked at the request of a state or when the president determines that conditions like unlawful obstructions, rebellion, or insurrection have made it difficult to enforce the law. During the civil rights era, 3 presidents, Eisenhower, Kennedy, and Johnson, used the act to protect activists or enforce court orders mandating desegregation. It was last used at the request of California's governor during the 1992 LA riots. So finally, there's one more term that I want to highlight here. That is, you might have seen it in the news. It's plenary authority. First of all, what is it? So plenary, it's the Legal Information Institute of Cornell's Law School defines plenary authority as power that is wide-ranging, broadly construed, and often limitless for all practical purposes. It is most often applied to legislative bodies as when government chooses to levy a tax or expend revenue. Lawmakers do not need to refer to the courts or a higher federal power for authorization to act when they have plenary authority over a matter. So again, very vague, very much up to interpretation what any of that even means. And with the Trump administration calling people terrorists just because they don't abide by the things that ICE are doing, or even what's going on in all these various cities where the National Guard has been deployed. Also saying things are insurrections. We're not all insurrectionists, all right? We saw what an insurrection looks like. We all watched it happen live on January 6th. So watch what happened though when Trump lackey Stephen Miller appeared on CNN and seemingly glitched after mentioning Trump's plenary authority.
Well, the administration filed an appeal this morning with the Ninth Circuit. I would note the administration won an identical case in the Ninth Circuit just a few months ago with respect to the federalizing of the California National Guard. Under Title 10 of the US Code, the president has plenary authority.
Stephen? Stephen? Hey, Stephen, can you hear me? It seemed, Stephen, I apologize. It seems like we're having a technical issue.
Okay, so Cenk, before I go to you, I just want to note that even giving Boris Sanchez there from CNN, giving him the benefit of the doubt that he really didn't know what was going on, that he really thought that there was a technical issue, and that is why he didn't press Stephen Miller further on what he had just said. This portion of the interview is no longer available through CNN. They've edited this portion out, and arguably you could say, well, there wasn't anything of substance in that clip, but I think most people would not agree with that assessment because obviously he said something that he feels as though he shouldn't have said. Maybe somebody was speaking to him saying stop, stop, stop in his earpiece. But whatever the case is, I guess, as somebody who is on camera for a living, maybe that's something I can try. If I say the wrong thing, I'll just stop talking and just pretend, just freeze frame. What do you think, Cenk?
Yeah, we've been doing the Young Turks for 23 years. So there have been a couple of times where politicians pretended that there was something wrong with their earpiece. And those were always hilarious. So look, I don't know what happened there. Maybe there was a technical problem. Maybe he kind of glitched out, as people are saying, because he realized, oh wait, I definitely shouldn't be saying this. It might be something they were planning to make a case for later, but it is curious that he happened to stop right as he was claiming that the president has, as Yaz explained, potentially limitless power, right? And that's when because that's part of the definition of plenary authority, right? And look, one of the things that'll be key in this administration is Stephen Miller is 100% pushing for all the different things we've shown you, including on yesterday's show, of things of calling anyone who they claim is not abiding by American family values, Trump anyway, Christianity, they consider anti-Christian, except now Hegseth's doing a purge of anyone who's ever criticized Charlie Kirk. I mean, this is like ludicrous stuff. And so calling people terrorists, saying you have unlimited authority, saying that there's an insurrection in the country. Really, right now there's an insurrection in the country? Right now. Like you're all worried that the House is gonna be taken over by anti-American forces and you're all bunkering down. There's no insurrection, right? They're using it obviously as an excuse to call the left wing and any Israeli critic terrorists, etc. So how are Trump voters going to respond to that? We know how the left is gonna respond, non-Trump voters are gonna respond. And we know that some portion of Trump voters that are on the right are gonna say, oh yes, finally, limitless power, right? And screw freedom of speech, and we never meant it. We just want to crack down on the left. We hate them so much, and we want to use the power. But that is not all of the right, and that is not all of Trump voters. So the folks that are movable, at least a third of Trump voters, but I think even larger, are they just gonna be like, oh yeah, the big government taking away our rights, and now the president has plenary authority, and I'm going to pretend there's an insurrection, and I love that there's military in the streets, and Oracle's founder talking about how we're all going to be monitored and all the citizens must behave, and now all of a sudden I love government tyranny. Or are they going to be like, wait a minute, we've been took. Okay, speaking of which, on whether Trump lied to you or not, by the way, he's a politician. Do the math, right? But okay. He said in the first clip we showed you in this segment, we're gonna take freedom of speech away. Let me go to a couple of clips from, here's one from 2002. Let's see if Trump was consistent. Let's watch.
If we don't have free speech, then we just don't have a free country. It's as simple as that. If this most fundamental right is allowed to perish, then the rest of our rights and liberties will topple. Just like dominoes, one by one, they'll go down. The censorship cartel must be dismantled and destroyed, and it must happen immediately. The fight for free speech is a matter of victory or death for America and for the survival of Western civilization itself.
So if you take freedom of speech away, it's the death of America and the end of Western civilization. I'll remind you, he just said, quote, we took the freedom of speech away. Okay, now, if you say, well, no, flag burning is not freedom of speech. First of all, the Supreme Court has ruled that way. Antonin Scalia, the most conservative justice of my lifetime, voted with the liberal justice, so did other conservatives, in saying, yeah, we hate flag burning, that's not the issue. The issue is, are you allowed to say it? We hate the N-word, we hate any kind of bigotry, racism, etc. But it doesn't mean you're not allowed to say it. The whole point of freedom of speech is to say unpopular things, right? So, but even if you were to say, okay, look, I don't think it's freedom of speech to burn a flag, even if the Supreme Court disagrees, even if the Constitution disagrees. But the question is, what does Trump think? Because Trump said earlier, if you take away freedom of speech, the country dies. And today he's saying, we took freedom of speech away. So he thinks it's freedom of speech and he's taking it away. If you're still not convinced that this was like the biggest issue for Donald Trump, here's one more clip from the past.
We will always protect free speech on college campuses. I am going to work very hard to protect free speech for all Americans. We will restore free speech, which we don't have now. After years and years of illegal and unconstitutional federal efforts to restrict free expression, I will also sign an executive order to immediately stop all government censorship and bring back free speech to America.
You just saw with your own eyes, he did the exact opposite. And that's not all. You know, he attacks anyone who he thinks is criticizing him. There's a politician going around, I don't like Jimmy Kimmel making jokes about me. I don't like Stephen Colbert making jokes about me. Come on, guys. That's the guy that you want to support? Okay, forget the guy. Do you have principles? Did you believe in freedom of speech? Now, people often on the right will say, oh yeah, well, when the Democrats were in charge, were you in favor of freedom of speech? Well, we've got tens of thousands of videos proving that we were in favor of freedom of speech and against cancel culture under Democrats, under Republicans. We have been consistent and principled on this from day one. So is the right wing going to be principled, or are they going to trash their principles and go, oh, if Trump's taking away freedom of speech, oh, I love it. Okay, yeah, Joe, no comics allowed. We hate, no jokes. No jokes about us. Make jokes about the Democrats, but not us. That's your freedom of speech, okay? And that's it. Anyone who criticizes Trump, we're gonna take FCC, we're gonna look into their license, let's take their license away, let's take their speech away. Not only freedom of speech, but freedom of press. Anyway, Trump has admitted it, so you see it. Look, last two things here are, I'm not gonna spend too much time on it because freedom of speech is so important. But look at the other two things. One is silly, the other one's super serious. The wife of Antifa. Now look, I know a lot of people on the right believe that Antifa is like this nefarious giant network of leftists and they're all coordinating, being paid by China and Qatar and whatever else that they imagine in their lives, okay? I don't know who Antifa is. From time to time, actually many years ago, a couple of people popped up and they said they were Antifa. Where are they today? I don't know. Who are they? I don't know. Have I ever run into a single person who claimed to be Antifa at the million left-wing conferences I've ever gone to? Never, right? Have I ever seen a leader? No. But now you caught the wife of the leader of Antifa or the founder? So who is it? Who's the so-called founder of Antifa, right? So guys, I know a lot of you on the right will not, and I address the left and the right. I assume I assume the whole country's watching. I know it's not necessarily the case, but I want to address all of you guys. And so for the right guys, like I know you think that that exists and that it's like some super nefarious group, etc. But it ain't, brother. There are randos that you don't like. Of course, there are protesters you don't like. There are people who cause property damage, etc. that you don't like. That's real, right? Some organized thing funded by other folks, etc. It ain't real. I don't know if you'll ever believe that, okay? But now let's go to the last thing, because that's kind of a silly one. The most important one, other than freedom of speech. Habeus corpus is probably the single most important part of Western civilization. So that goes not just to the US Constitution, it goes all the way back to the Magna Carta. And so what it is the the government must present someone. It means presenting their body, it's a Latin term. You can't just whisk someone away, a tyrannical government, and never charge them and say, I'm gonna put them in prison for no reason, and I don't have to explain myself to the people. No, you must show them, you must show evidence against them, otherwise the state cannot take away their freedom. And you saw clear as day in those two clips, Trump has no idea what habeas corpus is. How can you, if you could be a plumber and not know habeas corpus, you could be a really smart heart surgeon and not know habeas corpus because you're not into politics or you're not a lawyer, etc. But you're the president, you don't know what habeas corpus, the foundation of Western civilization is? And then, okay, you can say, well, maybe he knew, but he said he didn't know and he kicked it off to someone else. But Christine Noem, you saw it with your own eyes. She has no idea what habeas corpus is. The answer she gave was totally incorrect. She's the head of the Department of Homeland Security. Even at this late date, I'm stunned by their ignorance. So look, I don't need you to be a rocket scientist and I don't need you to be like a PhD in whatever, right? But you gotta know the bare minimum if you're gonna run the government.
Yeah, I mean, ideally you would hope so, but I can't help but feel as though Trump has put certain people in power in government specifically because they didn't know what they were doing, so that they're not going to get in his way whenever he decides to do whatever he wants to do. And I think I was talking about this in a Rebel HQ video recently. But with George W. Bush, when he became president back in the year 2000, right? Y2K, what a time that was. There was a lot of talk about how stupid he was, right? He didn't inspire a whole lot of confidence. And if only we knew what was coming for us. But at the time, the rhetoric that we kept hearing, the consolation that we kept telling ourselves was that, you know what, he might not be the brightest person in the room, but he surrounds himself with good people. They all know what they're doing and they're gonna guide him on the right path, right? We forgot about Dick Cheney. We didn't take him into consideration, or John Bolton and a few of these other people, but that's what we told ourselves. With Donald Trump, the people that he had in his administration in the first term, a lot of them, from what we hear, they did prevent him from doing the worst thing, right? They prevented him from acting on his absolute worst impulses. This time around, Trump has gotten rid of so many of those people, right? Deliberately, he put Pete Hegseth, just the most obvious example, as the head of the Department of Defense. And that on its own is like, he doesn't know what he's doing. We can all see that he doesn't know what he's doing. He's made rookie mistakes that are so rookie that even people like me who have never served in the military can look at it and be like, why'd you do that? Why didn't you know not to do that? But that is who we have running our government right now. But something else about freedom of speech, it always kind of fascinates me how someone like Trump can just go do a rally and say, I'm gonna protect freedom of speech because it's being attacked right now. We don't have freedom of speech right now. And people just nod in agreement, like, yeah, he's right. Even though, like, no, their freedom of speech was never threatened until right now under the Trump administration. Freedom of speech has never been threatened the way it is right now. And he straight up said, we just got rid of it. He just said, I don't think that this counts, and I just got rid of that. And they're still doing this thing where they're just telling people what reality is, and then people just believe it, despite the fact that they can look and they can see for themselves that what they're being told is not the truth. And when I was doing this story, I didn't include this part, but with the Trump administration targeting all these blue cities, the people on right-wing media and from the administration, they keep telling people that these cities are literally on fire. Trump really thinks that Portland is on fire right now, and that all these Democrat-run cities are overrun with crime and drugs. It's just everywhere and it's rampant. And they get away with telling people this because the majority of their supporters and their audience members don't live in those cities. So they just believe what they're told about them. Meanwhile, they're also being told that despite the actual footage contradicting what they're saying, that ICE is not, straight up abducting people off of the streets and taking people out of their homes. But an interesting clip that, again, I didn't include it in this story, but you can find it online. Kat Abu-Ghazaleh, who is a progressive Gen Z, she's running for Congress to represent Chicago. She actually was at one of these ICE protests, and she was thrown on the ground and she was physically abused by ICE agents. And she went on News Nation to tell them about her personal experience, what she literally saw herself with her own eyes, what she experienced herself, the abuse she experienced. And she went on News Nation, and the host just kept telling her, no, that's not what you saw. That's not what happened. That's not what is happening. And it was so bad that by the end of the interview, she just stopped talking to the host entirely and just addressed the audience straight on and said, you know what? He can say whatever he wants, but this is what I'm telling you I saw.
Every time you ring the bell below, an angel gets his wings. Totally not true, but it does keep you updated on our live shows.